20% of the world's fresh water surrounds our state. Are we doing enough to protect this critical asset? We'll do that next right here on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
What do you get if you equip the standard Lexus ES more like some others in its class? Perhaps it's more a question of what you don't get. The Lexus ES Standard is nothing short of extraordinary.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
Thank you. I'm Henry Baskin. We're going to be talking about water and environmental issues here on Due Process. And we've invited two experts, people who have spent a great deal of their time involved with not only water, but other environmental issues. David Uhlmann. David Uhlmann is, formerly you were with the federal government, right?
That's right. I was served at the Justice Department for 17 years, the last 7 as chief of the environmental crime section at the Justice Department.
And currently you are?
I'm a professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and I run our environmental law and policy program.
Okay. Does it extend beyond the university? Do you advise groups around the state?
Well, we don't. We're training new lawyers, okay. So we don't have a role advising groups across the state. But my colleagues and I are all quite active in both state and national environmental law issues.
Okay, Neil Kagan, welcome to Due Process.
Thank you.
Tell us about your background and where you're presently operating from.
Well, my background is as a public interest environmental lawyer. I've been doing this now for about 30 years. Mm-hmm. And for the past 15, I've been working for the National Wildlife Federation as a senior counsel in the Great Lakes Regional Center, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay. Tell me what problems, aside from what we all read right now about Asian carp and the screens that we want put in Illinois and things such as that, what other problems do we have immediately with the Great Lakes?
Well, one of the biggest problems facing the Great Lakes is the problem of invasive species. And I'm not just talking about the Asian carp. I'm talking about species that are transported to the Great Lakes from other places around the world in the ballast water of ships that take on that ballast water in other ports in Europe and in Asia. And the invasive species that have been brought in the ballast water of those ships and then discharged in the Great Lakes have cost billions of dollars of damage to the infrastructure of the communities around the Great Lakes, and have also had a devastating impact on the ecosystem. And one of the prime examples of the invasive species that has caused these problems is the zebra mussel. It was brought to this country in the ballast water of a ship from the Baltic area, probably, and as a result spread throughout the Great Lakes in less than 20 years, and has now spread as far as the Hudson River to the east, down the Mississippi, and has even been found as far west as California.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. In your experience, and you spent a great deal of time in the area, is there a way to prevent, by federal law, the discharge of ballast from foreign ships, or even American ships that have been in foreign waters?
Well, until very recently, we haven't had any rules to govern ballast water discharges. So we weren't doing, not only not doing enough, we weren't doing really anything to protect the Great Lakes, or for that matter, other water systems in the United States from ballast. Over the last few years, that's changed, and there are new rules that are now in place. But as with any new rules, you can't. You can start working on the rules right away and start working on making sure that everybody's complying with the rules right away. But it takes time to get a new legal regime in place and better protect the water systems.
Prior to the zebra mussel, wasn't there a lamprey, a sea lamprey, or something that was attached to our? What happened to those? Are they? disappear?
No, the sea lamprey is still a problem. It's being combated with chemical controls, but it was devastating to the commercial fishery and recreational fishery in the Great Lakes. It managed to get into the Great Lakes through the Welland Canal, which was used to connect the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes in order to allow for the passage of these large ocean-going vessels. So really the Welland Canal, which was completed, I think, in the late 50s, is the main reason we have problems such as a zebra mussel and the sea lamprey.
Well, where do we start? I mean, in other words, does the federal government have a specific department that looks after 20% of the world's fresh water?
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency is the federal agency that's responsible for the implementation of the Clean Water Act. They work with state governments, including the government, the state government in Michigan, on clean water issues. But really, I think the heart of the problem that we're addressing is it's not just limited to invasive species. I mean, the issue here is we have aging environmental laws in the United States. Our environmental law system was all created 40 years ago, and we've done nothing to update our environmental laws to address the challenges that we face today. And that's a problem for the federal government, that's a problem for state governments, that's a problem throughout the country.
I just want to cover this one thing. When you have competing interests, as the states have competing interests in the Great Lakes, say like Michigan, how does the federal government adjust and mediate that process? I mean, you know that Illinois is saying, look, we're not going to shut down our system and back up all of the Asian carp because they're probably not going to enter Lake Michigan, which may or may not be true, but there has to be someone. We can't have states are not going to fight each other, although they have strong words for each other. But there has to be a central government that says, hey, this is what we do and this is what we don't do. President Obama, I think, had executive power to do something about the screens and obstacles to keeping the Asian carp out. Nothing happened.
Not enough is happening quickly enough, that's for sure. But Congress indeed passed a law requiring the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do a study of the feasibility of preventing the carp from getting from the Mississippi River Basin to the Great Lakes. Okay. And the National Wildlife Federation and many other environmental groups around the basin, as well as commercial fishermen and others, have been advocating for hydrological separation of the Great Lakes from the Mississippi River Basin. Okay. I mean, the reason we have this problem of potential influx of Asian carp is because the original separation.
We put them in the Mississippi, didn't we?
Well, not only that, but in the 1800s, early 1900s, Chicago reversed the flow of the Chicago River, which used to flow into Lake Michigan, to flow the other way into the Mississippi River Basin. Mm-hmm. Previously, the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Basins were separate. And now that they're not, because of this connection that was made by Chicago and the state of Illinois, right, Asian carp can come this way, and zebra mussels and other species can go that way.
Can go that way. Fair exchange. But can you describe what the basin is? Because there is something called the Great Lakes Basin. Can you define it? Well, here, we'll have you define it as a professor.
Well, it's actually a better question for Neil, who works on Great Lakes issues. I mean, you've correctly noted that the Great Lakes are, I mean, they're a jewel, not just in the United States, but in the world. And as you pointed out, 20% of the fresh water is in the Great Lakes Basin. But the basin is not just the Great Lakes. So let's have Neil explain.
Well, the basin, I think, could be defined as the watershed, the water that falls, or the rainfall, and the rivers that flow into the Great Lakes.
And the sanitary drainage from sanitary sewer systems?
Yes.
Okay.
All the water that drains into the Great Lakes, the geographic area within which that water is coming into the Great Lakes is the Great Lakes Basin or watershed.
Okay.
So all tributaries, all runoff, everything that flows into the Great Lakes.
Part of the basin?
Yes.
Okay. Because there was a small town, I think in Wisconsin, that needed some water, and they were not in the basin, and they weren't entitled to draw water out of Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. which is interesting because I know there's 2 pumps in the lower part of Lake Michigan pumping water into Chicago, but I don't want to get there. But that they're projects that were built years ago to give water to I think the river, so that they could have access to it in Chicago, which is sort of unusual. But we'll just put that back in history and talk about the other issues. Some time ago, there was an issue where the Nestle company decided to take bottled water out of an area not too far from Lake Michigan. The argument then was that's part of our system, and the governor said at the time, entrepreneurial people can do that. It's not going to affect this, and that. I don't even know how you make decisions concerning what is allowable with diving into the aquafilters and saying there's some water here that we can bottle and we can sell to people for $1.39 when they can get some water free. What governs that? What governs the use of the subterranean water that eventually would probably flow out to the Great Lakes?
Well, that's a matter of state law. That's not a matter of federal law.
So every state can pass a law that regulates the drainage or the taking the water out of the aquifer, out of the subterranean portions.
Well, the water rights, and again, this is a question Neil may have more to say about. The water rights are certainly governed by state law. There is federal law if we start talking about drinking water systems and public drinking water systems, which is a different issue. We do get into federal law issues, but when we're talking about who owns the water and who has rights to use the water and what limits there are, that's not a matter of federal law. That's a matter of state law.
Well, because at one time it seems that all the states came together when somebody it was possibly Lake Ontario the Japanese wanted to extract water from the Great Lakes, put it in these large vessels, and transport it to Japan. And that was stopped. I believe it was stopped through a coalition of the states that say, wait a minute, this is not, it's hard to share. Water is so fungible. I can't tell you what belongs where, but the states did say we don't want people taking water out. It was a long time ago predicted, before we go to break here, that there would be a pipeline from the Great Lakes down to Texas, because that would be the real shortage in our country. And I don't know if you agree with that or you don't agree with it, fresh water.
Well, fresh water is we're going to have serious issues with fresh water, not only in this country but throughout the world. And in this country, you mentioned Texas, the Southwest United States. I mean, even California has freshwater problems to beat the band.
Right.
We don't in this region, but I think the concern is that because this region has such a treasure in terms of its freshwater resources, that's going to somehow be depleted or used by other parts of the country. I mean, John McCain, when he ran for president 3 years ago, briefly suggested that maybe we could take some water from the Great Lakes and help folks down in Arizona. He realized that wasn't such a good idea.
No, it was a bad idea for him. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to some people who are affected by some of the oil spills and some of the discharges into their adjacent rivers and such. We'll be right back.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
We're back on Due Process. We're talking about what surrounds us, and we're talking about environmental law, actually, is what we're doing. But there are people who we've invited down by remote, Suzanne Conley and Deb Miller. Welcome to Due Process.
Thank you.
Both of you have been impacted by some episodes that have occurred in adjacent waters to your homes and your businesses, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And you at one time formed groups. Deb, you want to tell us what happened in your situation?
Well, on 10 months ago, an Enbridge pipeline broke in Marshall, Michigan, which is about a mile upstream from my home and business. We own a carpet store on the top of the dam at Ceresco, and my home is directly below the dam. We have about 700 feet of frontage on both, and about 100,000 gallons of diluted dilbit was spilled into our river, and it closed our business for about 13 weeks, and it's really turned our lives upside down. Not only just from the smell, future concerns about our health, our environment. Our river has been shut. We've dealt with trucks and cleanup, and I know that the cleanup process is going to be intense, and we're not quite sure whether it's going to be this year or 10 years from now before we're going to be able to use our river again. Last weekend we were blessed with the wildlife individuals putting turtles back into our river, and I know maybe to some that's not a big thing, but when you grow up on a river, my children watched wildlife. We'd stand on our deck and watch the fish swim below. We've not seen that for months. We've not seen turtles, anything.
Did anyone from the state or federal government come out and talk to you about your situation?
No.
Now, have you asked any of the authorities to do that?
Yes. I testified in Washington, D.C. on September 15 along with 5 other individuals, and it started some conversations with the EPA, so we are very, very thankful for that. You're thankful for starting the conversations, absolutely,
at the very least.
Absolutely.
Did Enbridge ever do anything for you?
I will be honest to tell you that Enbridge reluctantly gave us a business interruption compensation, and after a lawyer helped us obtain a 6-month access agreement at our business because the business was closed.
Okay.
We currently do not have any compensation for inconvenience for the business or for our home. It was advertised on local TV that 95% of the residents along the spill have been compensated, so I guess we're just one of the unlucky ones.
Right, you're one of the 5%.
Yeah.
Susan, tell us about your story.
I guess I became involved. My children, at the time of the spill, were attending a daycare center located about a half a mile from Talmadge Creek and the Kalamazoo River, and they had health effects from the spill.
Was this part of the Enbridge is a line that comes across, I believe, from Canada laterally across the state of Michigan, headed in some direction, I think in Indiana or Illinois, I'm not sure.
Illinois.
So have you ever had any problems with it before?
Didn't even know it was there.
Didn't know.
I don't think anyone within Calhoun County realized that there was such a pipeline, and there actually is more than one pipeline that runs through Calhoun County.
What is the effect? What was the effect of the spill? Seriously, because it was downplayed on the eastern side of the state to some extent. More play on your side.
I think the large problem, and the reason why I'm very much involved, is I'm trying to get a long-term health study approved, and I'm still trying to help those to try to get better regulation, not just for Enbridge and the companies that maintain and control the pipelines, but my main focus is that the long-term health study, and also to try to get better federal and state regulations, because they're so outdated and so inaccurate. They really need to step up and start getting some better policies put through, because the health effects, people are still having effects even to this day, and you're talking 10 months. And there are many people that are still having serious problems.
So the EPA has done nothing overt yet, except say we're investigating?
I think the EPA, those that we know, they're going as far as they can. They're doing as much as they can within their own guidelines and their own regulations. With our meetings with them, between Deb and I think they want to do even more, but they're restricted.
Well, stay there for a second. Now, are they restricted by the state of Michigan or by the federal government?
Well, it's not just EPA. So EPA has responsibility for the Kalamazoo River, along with the state of Michigan. So this was a pipeline rupture that resulted in a spill to the Kalamazoo River. And the river and the issues along the river, EPA can address. But there's a bigger issue here, which Susan has alluded to, and that is that we have an aging pipeline system in the United States. Most of our pipelines were built 50 years ago. They're even older than the environmental laws. And the office that has responsibility for pipelines, the Office of Pipeline Safety, which is part of the Department of Transportation. They're the ones who have to address this ticking time bomb we have, which is, what happened in Marshall is terrible. What happened with Enbridge is terrible, but it's happened in other communities, and it's going to keep happening in other communities across our country until we strengthen the laws and strengthen the regulations of pipelines.
Is it possible to say to some outside source that, look, no oil will flow unless we're certain the infrastructure is correct and proper?
I'd love to say that, but then we'll pay for it.
Well,
I think that's the concern.
You may reverse around and you may pay for it, but is it possible to say that? To draft a law that says, because of, one state will say we don't want that, or the other state will say yes, but if you're going to cross Michigan, we kept some toxic waste out of Michigan, can't you do the same?
Well, the pipeline system is an interstate pipeline system.
Interstate, okay.
So I don't think Michigan could pass that law. And I don't think Michigan would pass that law, even if it could. Nor do I think the federal government would pass that law. I mean, this is the great dilemma we have in this country. There's a lot we need to do about how we meet our energy needs. Pipelines are just one aspect of this. We need to meet our energy needs in ways that are, they're better for the environment, better for people in communities like this community that's been affected. But we don't do what we need to do because we're more interested in making sure we can flip the light switch on and meet those energy needs.
What do you suggest they do, Neil, real quickly, because I want to talk to you about a toxic waste site in Canada.
Well, I agree that there needs to be better oversight of the existing pipeline system. Much too much is left to the discretion and control of the companies that actually own and operate these pipelines. That's partially an issue of funding that is given to the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They have, I think, perhaps 100 inspectors that are responsible for the whole country. So
not enough to go around.
That's true.
Not even close.
So you think they should appeal to any further agency or do what they're doing?
Well, I'm sure they're doing as much as they can possibly do, but I do think the agency does need to strengthen its regulations, require better monitoring of the pipelines, better inspections, and better plans for responding quickly to problems.
Let me tell the ladies that we don't recommend, but I think an environmental law lawyer might be more appropriate. But that's just a thought.
Could I just interject one thing very quickly? When we were in Washington, we also noticed that the Department of Transportation, there's the one head committee, but then there are numerous subcommittees. And the concern is the one Department of Transportation will basically state, well, we don't know what the other subcommittees are doing. So there's a great concern that the higher-ups don't realize what the other subsidiaries are doing. So I think there needs to be better regulation between the departments themselves and communication for knowing what the others are doing. I think there are so many different committees involved, the one doesn't know what the other is doing.
I don't want to catch up, but welcome to Washington. That's how it is. Thank you so much for being with us and telling us about your particular situation. Tell me about the fact that somebody in Canada has decided to have a deep injection well for toxic waste not too far from Lake Huron, that they want to insert the hazardous waste into this well, which they say is 50 miles deep. Now, obviously, there are concerns that people surrounding Lake Huron and the Great Lakes might have with this. Where do you go with that problem? It's a federal issue.
Well, it may be a federal issue, but it's actually first and foremost a Canadian issue. I mean, that's the challenge you have as Michigan residents would have who had concern about that, because what happens in Canada in terms of how they monitor hazardous waste disposal is a matter of Canadian law. I mean, their laws aren't bad on hazardous waste disposal. Canada's actually got a pretty decent environmental record.
To put it that close to, I mean, I'm not reacting to tsunamis and things such as that, but to put it that close to Lake Huron and promise that it's not going to leach out, it's going to be safe for the next 5,000 years. I don't know. We're all so skeptical about these things that we don't know if we can believe them or not. And you say it's a Canadian government thing. Does our federal government intervene for us?
Well, what I'm saying is that the disposal of that waste would be first and foremost a matter of Canadian law. If there was evidence that that waste that was being disposed in those wells was somehow reaching the United States, then obviously it would become a federal issue.
By the time we find that out, it's going to be too late. That's the unfortunate part. We could go on for hours about this subject because it is really 20% of our natural resources surround us in this state alone. Thank you for doing what you do. Continue the good fight, and let's hope that we bring some justice to the people who live in and around the Great Lakes and the tributaries. So I appreciate your being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. You're funded by public funds or donations?
Well, we have memberships who support us, individuals who pay membership dues who support us, plus we get grants from foundations. We also get grants from federal agencies.
You deal with, I think I've heard of it, what, typical net and some other stuff, other northern.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
What do you get if you equip the standard Lexus ES more like some others in its class? Perhaps it's more a question of what you don't get. The Lexus ES Standard is nothing short of extraordinary.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.